Hey everyone. Thanks for joining us for the last session of our Python and AI Level Up series on Model Context Protocol. My name is Anna. I'll be your producer for this session. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenter and moderator to answer. The session is recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speaker for today. Pamela, thank you so much for joining.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Python AI series. This is, in fact, the last session in the series. It's been a ton of fun. I really enjoyed it. I love seeing so many people in the chat over and over, and also, hey, to anyone who's watching after the fact in the recording. This is our final session in the series. It's a 9-part series. All of the videos are available on YouTube with slides and code samples. So if you missed anything, go back and watch it. I do recommend watching everything in order because we did sequence them in a particular way because the concepts do build on each other. And, hopefully it gives you a great foundation in how to use Python with generative AI. We had a lot of fun putting on this series, and we'd love to hear your ideas for what other series we should put on that would help you grow as, AI engineers and developers. So just put in the chat your ideas for what topics you want to see in the future. So for today, our final topic is MCP, Model Context Protocol. This is a big topic in the last year, only in the last year, but it is like just exploded in the last year. And it's a really fun topic and an important one, and could potentially be the future of the basis of a lot of technologies. So today we're going to be talking about what is MCP, and then building MCP servers in Python, and that you'll be able to follow along the code of that, and how we can use our AI agents with MCP servers, both our own and other people's MCP servers. So if you do want to follow along with the code, we have a repo for today. I think, actually, is that URL slightly wrong? Let me see. Oh, no, that's correct. Okay, that's the right URL. And we're going to put that in the chat so that you can follow that URL. There you go. So you'll go to that link, and then that brings you to the repo. And once you're on the repo, click the code button, and you'll see a local option and a code spaces option. You can do local if you want to set it up, but then you will have to set up your environment variables. So we usually recommend code spaces where everything is set up for you. So I'm going to click create code space on main. So that creates a GitHub code space in the browser, which is basically a VS Code running inside the browser that has the code open for the repository, and it has the right version of, Python installed, and the, UV. And so everything you need in order to run the demos for today. So I'll just let that get set up in the background and go back to the slides. So first, let's talk generally about MCP and what it actually is. So before we had MCP, if we wanted to integrate a service like an API with our generative AI application, we had to individually figure out how we were going to bring in that service. Like how is our LLM going to be communicating with that service, right? You do it like via tool calling or maybe via structured outputs, right? But we had to figure it out, right? And also other services like ChatGPT and Claude, right? These are all generative AI applications. GitHub Copilot, they all had to figure out like how they would integrate with other services, right? So we saw things like plugins. I think in GitHub Copilot, we called them like extension participants, chat participants, right? There was all these different ways people were coming up with different paradigms for connecting these, AI applications and chat assistants to other services and APIs. So that was getting a bit difficult. And basically what they realized is like, okay, we need a common way to connect these applications, these AI applications, with external tools, data sources, and abilities. So this protocol MCP was created by Anthropic as a way to standardize these interactions. And so they created originally for Claude, the Claude application, Claude Desktop. It's an application you can run that's similar to ChatGPT, where you're using an LLM in order to get answers to your questions and figure things out, right? So they created MCP originally for Claude Desktop, but it just took the world by storm. So they put it out there. Like, luckily, they put it out there as a protocol, and people realize, like, oh, this is something we need, right? This is actually huge. Like, if we can all agree on MCP, then developers could write MCP servers once and then have them be usable by anything that supported interaction with an MCP server. So that's why we came up with MCP and why it's so helpful. And now that we have MCP, MCP is the medium that these interactions go through. So now when we have these applications, like Claude and Copilot, even ChatGPT now finally supports MCP. If you want to connect them with these other services, the standard way to connect them is to go through MCP servers. So if somebody has a service and wants to make it easy for people to use them with these applications, they can choose to expose an MCP server. And then also when we're developing our own AI applications, like when we're developing our own agents, we can also use MCP as a way of connecting to these other services, right? So for those of you who were, at the last two sessions about tool calling and agents, and we saw how we could connect agents to tools, we can now connect agents to an MCP server, and the MCP server exposes the tools, right? So we have this standardized way of getting tools from other servers. Now with MCP, we get more than just tools. We also get resources, prompts, like all sorts of other things as well. But tools is really where a lot of the, the great functionality comes from. So this is the overall MCP architecture and like kind of jargon that you need to know. So in MCP, we have MCP servers, MCP clients, and MCP hosts. So a server, that's a thing that actually exposes tools and prompts and resources, right? So for example, there's a GitHub MCP server, there's a documentation MCP server, there's a Notion MCP server, there's like a Figma MCP server. So these are all servers that are exposing their functionality as tools, prompts, and resources. And then we want to actually consume the tools from those servers. So for that, we have a MCP host. So an MCP host would be something like Claude, Copilot, ChatGPT. An MCP host is an application that's capable of connecting to MCP servers. So within an MCP host, that host will use an MCP client in order to open up a connection to an MCP server and start consuming the tools and other things from that server. So that is the overall architecture of MCP, and it helps to know these terms because sometimes you're going to be in different parts of this diagram. Like sometimes you're going to be writing the MCP server, sometimes you're making the MCP hosts and the clients, and sometimes you're doing all of it, right? And we're going to do a little bit of everything today. So here, in terms of MCP clients, there's actually a huge number of clients. This is just a subset of the list from the Model Context Protocol website. And it just really shows you how much support there is for MCP across the AI ecosystem, how it's really gotten adopted so fast. Like, it's really exciting for anyone who likes open standards, because this is basically the first open standard that we've had in the generative AI space that's like actually an open standard that's been like really, really adopted across the board, right? I think the other big one we have is agents.md for coding agents, right? So it's it's exciting whenever everyone can agree on stuff, because that makes stuff better for developers, right? Now that everybody's agreeing on MCP, then it means that we can write our code just once and have it work in a lot of different environments. So as a developer, I love it. Everyone's getting along and happy and going along with MCP. So we're going to use an example for today for our MCP host. We're going to use VS Code with GitHub Copilot. It does have complete support for the MCP specification. It stays very up to date, with changes in the spec. It is an active specification, so there are new things being added to the specification all the time. We do have people from Microsoft that work on that specification, along with people from Anthropic, Pydantic. There's a bunch of companies that are working on this specification together in order to figure out what are the issues with it and what do we need to improve, right? Like I see there's a question about authentication in the chat. Authentication is a particularly hard thing to figure out. And there is, in the spec, it does talk about how to do authentication. So you can pass around keys and tokens, but you can also do full OAuth authentication, right? And so depending on what server you're using, there's different ways of doing that auth. But they put a lot of thought into the specification about how does authentication work in this context. So with VS Code, I'll show you how we can install it. So here I'm actually using my local VS Code just because it's a little easier to demo the existing MCP servers here. So what you can do is go to your extensions tab. And if you want to find just MCP servers, the way to do it is to say @MCP. And that will show all these MCP servers you can install. So you can see like Marketdown, GitHub, Playwright. So GitHub is the one that I use the most often. And actually, I thought I already had it installed. Let's see. I might have installed it a different way. All right. Yeah. You can install these servers multiple ways, but here, I'll install it from here just to show. And here, so it says the MCP server wants to authenticate to GitHub. So the GitHub MCP server is one that uses the OAuth authentication by default. So if I click allow here, I'm going to specify my username. And let's see, it looks like I'm already logged in. So it's got my OAuth token. And so now it's going to use OAuth in order to communicate with that server, right? So some of the servers do require auth. Some of them require API keys. Some of them are OAuth. Some of them are completely public. It just depends on the server, right? We also have like the Microsoft Learn server. I already have that one installed. That one's just a completely public server that doesn't require any sort of authentication, right? So then once we have them installed, then we can go over to GitHub Copilot. And here in GitHub Copilot, I want to be in agent mode because agent mode is where I can use tools. And then in agent mode, I can click on the little tools icon here, and it'll show me all the MCP servers that I can enable. So we've got too many GitHubs. I'm gonna start by disabling the GitHub. And so you can see on this server, there's a ton of tools. The GitHub MCP server is super helpful, but it does expose a lot of tools. So much of the time I will actually disable the server unless I know I really need it. So here you can see I've got built-in tools from VS Code. I've got some extensions that expose tools, and then I've got MCP servers that expose tools. So then I can ask a question that'll use one of these tools, like the Microsoft Docs server. I'll be like, okay, what support do Microsoft products like VS Code have for MCP? All right. So we'll try asking that question. And now GitHub Copilot is going to look at its tools and send those to the LLM, which in this case is Claude Sonnet 4.5, and says, hey, LLM, here's the user's question. Here are the tools. What tools do you want to run? And we can see it's already started running the tools. And it's running, you can see that it's running against this Microsoft Docs MCP server. You can expand this if you want to see what arguments it sent to the tool. So here we can see that it's sent in this query. We can even see the output. So this is really helpful if you really want to understand how it's working with these tools. So it looks like it did a couple queries in order to answer that question. And then we got back the answer, right? So that's nice for doing research. Now, what's powerful about the tools is that some of the tools can actually do things on your behalf, right? Because remember, I actually logged into the GitHub extension. So let me go ahead and enable the GitHub MCP server, and then say, I'll say find a stale issue from the Azure Samples, Azure Search OpenIDemo repo, and decide whether it can be closed. And I'm going to say, don't close it yet. So here's the thing. Big warning is that if you're using MCP servers that have access to tools that can, make changes to your accounts, you want to be really, really careful when you're using them, because they have access to change stuff on your accounts on your behalf. And some agents will be, like some LLMs in particular, like the Claude LLMs, tend to be very eager about doing things for you. Sometimes they can be too helpful, and they might take an action that you didn't actually intend it to do, right? So here I specifically said, like, I added here, don't close it yet, because I've run this query before where it's decided to close the issue for me. And I'm like, no, I didn't want it, right? So that's generally something that you want to be careful about with MCP servers, that you're really aware of what tools are in that MCP server and whether those are read-only tools or whether they can actually make changes to things, right? So here you can see it's running some, read-only tools like searching the issues, getting issue details, getting issue comments, then it's analyzing the issue. And then it says suggested closing comment, right? So it suggests what to do. Let's see, the user asked, And so if I wanted to, I could actually tell it to go and close the issue now. If I, was confident that this was a good response, or I could like modify it, right? And I could be like, okay, great, close the issue. Now, I don't want to do that because I do actually want to take a look at the issue and make sure that this is a good response. But if I did this, it could actually go and close the issue because it has that MCP server has the ability to update issues. Now, what you can do inside VS Code is that you can customize it, and you can say like, well, I'm going to let you, access some of the tools, right? A lot of times I give it access to all the get tools and the list tools and the search tools, but then like I'll change anything like update, right? Update issue, right? If I'm worried that it's going to do something I don't want it to do. So that's something that you can, you can actually decide like what tools from an MCP server are you going to enable. All right. So that's just how to use MCP servers from Copilot, or, from other MCP hosts like, Cloud Desktop would be similar. Now we're going to start looking into how we can actually build an MCP server. So first, it helps to understand the components, right? So the big component is tools. We just saw lots of tools being used from those MCP servers. And those tools are, just the useful functionality that a server can expose. Now, servers can also expose resources, which you can just think of as data, right? Some sort of data that's helpful, that don't actually require like really parameters so much. And they can expose prompts, right? So if I go back to VS Code and I click / I can see here a bunch of prompts that are exposed by the MCP servers. So GitHub actually, they build prompts into their MCP server, like this one to assign to a coding agent, this one to fix a workflow, right? And so I could just, click that prompt, and then it's going to ask me for some parameters to, insert into that prompt template, and then it'll actually write the prompt for me. And you can also use resources. So if you do add context and then click MCP resources, then you can see all the resources that are exposed by a server. So here we can see that the GitHub MCP server exposes resources, which are the actual like bits of content in your repo. So you could grab the content of a specific path and just have that be the context that's referenced in your conversation. So most of the times when I'm using MC server, it's all about the tools and using those tools, but you can also expose resources and prompts and use those when you're, using a server that exposes them. So it's helpful to know that MCP servers are more than just tools. So now let's actually build a server that exposes tools, resources, and prompts. Now, when you're building a server in Python, there are two main SDKs that you can consider using. They're very similar, so it can be a little confusing. The first SDK is the official Python SDK, and it's designed to be fully compatible with the protocol specification, since it is from the MCP team. And it includes a nice MCP server in it. The second SDK is the FastMCP server, and it's not, it's not from the official MCP team, but it has a ton of features and does stay really up to date with the spec as well. And it has more features on top of the official Python SDK. Now, what's very confusing is that the official Python SDK actually integrated version 1 of FastMCP. So you will see FastMCP inside the official SDK as well. But if you want the latest and greatest version of FastMCP, then you should use that package directly. So that can be really confusing. For today, we're going to go with FastMCP version 2, which is the standalone FastMCP package. So in this package, we'll see it's very Pythonic. We can use Python type hints, Python decorators. We can do async, we can use annotations, and we can run the server in multiple ways. So let's say how we have to do it. We're going to go back to that code space and see it's all set up now. Let me make it way bigger. And I'm going to go to my VS Code folder and click on mcp.json. So here we have a configuration for what MCP servers are associated with this project in particular. So here you can see this expenses MCP server. It is using UV in order to run a file. So basically when you're making servers, you have two options. You can actually be running local files. So you can be using UV to run Python files, or if you were developing in JavaScript, you'd be using Node, NPX. In Python, we're generally going to be using UV, which is a way of running Python files. So we're okay, use UV to run this file here. So what I'm going to do is click the little start button here. Let me make it even bigger. So let's say start. And now it says it is running. And I can even look at the output from the logs here and see that it says it discovered one tool. So that's good. And then I can look at the actual code that it's running, right? So here, this is the code it's running. We can see that we are using the FastMCP package. And this is an expense tracking server. So it is using, it's just doing local expense tracking. We're starting simple here. So we've got this expenses.csv. It's basically going to use this as the database, and it's going to save expenses here and reference this for everything. What we have is a tool, and this tool, this is the main one, or this is the only tool it exposes. It's called add expense, and the tool takes 5 arguments, and you can see for each of the arguments, each of them has a type and has a description. So best practice, because you could just do date, and the MCP, the MCP client would see, oh, okay, it's a date type, but best practice is to always annotate your arguments so that this description gets sent as well. And that just helps the LLMs to decide how to use a particular argument. Because a lot of times your LLM, your agent, is going to be figuring out what arguments to pass to these tools. And so you want to give it as much information as possible, right? You want to give it the types, and you want to give some additional information that'll help it format it. So here we've got date, float, we've got category, which is an enum, a Python enum. So that's one of several values. We've got a string, and we've got another enum. And basically this file here opens the expenses.csv and adds to that file. So let me go over to my GitHub Copilot, and in the code spaces, it does default to ask. We're going to want to change that. And I'm also just going to make sure I don't have any context open, because I don't want it to get confused by seeing the file itself. So I'm going to close all the files. I'm going to change this to agent mode. The model doesn't really matter so much. You can pick your favorite model. They should all work fine. And then I'm going to check to see which of my tools are enabled. So when I open up this little tool thing here, I can see here which of the MCP servers are enabled. And I want to make sure that the first one is checked because we're going to see a couple different ways of writing the server. So for here, this is the one I've got running, which is just expenses.mcp. So I just make sure that that is checked. Okay. So all that looks good. And now I can say like, yo, I bought $30 worth of sushi last night with my corporate Amex card. All right. So what we can see is that it immediately realizes it should use that add expense tool. And it suggests the arguments to use it, right? It says like, okay, we're going to do 30, for the amount, category food, here's the date, here's the description, and here's the payment method. All right. So we're going to see, we see that it's asking us to allow it. This is what GitHub Copilot does when you're using a tool for the first time, is that it generally asks if you're going to allow it. So in this case, I'll just say I'll always allow. And now that means every time it wants to run that in the future, it's just going to let it go through. So it says, okay, it worked. It got added to the CSV. And if we look here, we can see that it got added to the CSV. So that is it using the tool, right? It went through and it ran all this code for those arguments there. So what else can we expose from our MCP server? We also can expose resources. And so when we do a resource, the way we expose it is we say at mcp.resource, and then we give the resource what looks like kind of an identifier, like a path identifier. So we say, resource : / expenses. And then we have a function, and that function needs to return back a string, right? So in this case, what it's doing is it's opening up that CSV, and then it's returning back all the expenses data in a way that the coding agent can use. So if we want to reference this resources, what we do is click on Add Context and click MCP Resources and click on the resource expenses. And then we can see that it's attached it to the conversation. So this is similar to when you're like, attaching like a file to your conversation with Copilot, right? You're saying like, I really want to reference this bit of data here. So then I can say like, okay, summarize my Amex expenses in a list. All right. So it's going to reference that expenses resource and make this nice list here. So that's a resource. It's a bit of data that your server can expose. All right. What else do we have? We can also expose a prompt. So here we're saying mcp.prompt, and we give a name for a prompt, and you can even have arguments for your prompt. And so these will, these are basically things you could use as template variables for your, for the prompt that you output, right? So in this case, we're saying, oh, if you want to, tell me the category and start date and end date. And then we basically return a string, and we, dynamically generate that string based off of, whatever they entered. So let me go ahead and use this prompt so you can see how I would use it. So once again, in order to use prompts in GitHub Copilot, you say / and that will pull up any of the prompts that are exposed by the MCP servers and extensions. So I'm going to use this second one here because that's the one from this current server. And you can see it pops up this thing asking for the arguments, and these are optional. So I could just leave them optional, but I'll say food for that. And then I won't enter those. And it says, please analyze my sending patterns and provide blah, 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 right? So you can see here, it is a fancier version of the analysis that I asked for before. And it's kind of nice to just always have that prompt available if it's something that you expect people to be doing a lot with this MCP server. So here, it basically, it sends the prompt and then, and then answer all of this. It says, I should limit my high cost meals to special occasions. Well, I want to eat sushi every day. Actually, I learned how to make my own sushi now, so I can't eat it every day. It's great. All right. So there, as you see, we were able to use tools, resources, and prompts. right? So once again, if you're doing a tool, you're going to do mcp.tool and make sure that you specify the names, types, and descriptions of each of the arguments. You also want to add a nice doc string to your tool because that's going to get passed as well. Like basically you want to assume that all of this information here is going to get passed to the agent to decide whether to use your tool and how to use your tool. So you want to make all of this information in the function signature be really, really helpful. And then we had our resources, which is useful for data, and we had our prompts. Okay, so that is our basic Python MCP server built with FastMCP SDK. We saw these. Now, this one, I was running this all using that UV run command, right? This is what's known as the standard input output transport. There's two different ways you can run MCP servers. You can run them as these local files, which is convenient if you're developing and it's just something for you. And that's just gonna, and you have the ability to, run UV and have that set up. It can be a little annoying sometimes because you have to make sure that your system can run Python correctly and that you've got all the required packages and all of that stuff. So that's mostly been used for development and debugging. Now most MCP servers are actually run using HTTP, an HTTP with streaming. And this way, what we do is that we just run a server, right? And then that server exposes its tools at particular endpoints. And then when we're connecting to the server, we just say, hey, here's the server, connect to that server and get all the tools and resources and prompts from that server. So in practicality, I think a lot of the MCP servers that you'll be building will probably be using HTTP. So how do we actually serve MCP servers over FTP? When we're using FastMCP, we're just going to change a line. So let me show you how we. So with the standard input output, we just use mcp.run, and that defaults to standard input output. But if we want to change it to HTTP, then I'm going to open up this other file, basic MCP HTTP, and then scroll to the bottom. And what you'll see here is that it says mcp.run transport equals HTTP. And here's the host and here's the port. All right. So this is going to run a HTTP server on port 8000. So then how do we actually run this? Well, we need to actually run this file, right? Because we need to get this server running. So I'm going to say uv run basic mcp http.py. And we can see that it does say that the server is running on 8000. And we can also see that in our, let's see, is it in our ports tab? Oh, it's not showing up on our ports tab. Okay. We can go and say open. And so that opens up the server and it says not found. That's fine. That's what you're supposed to see is not found. That's what you see at the root of the MCP server domain. So that is our server running there. And now we need, how do we actually, use this in our, with our Copilot? So we can go to mcp.json. I'm going to stop the old server, the one that was over standard input output. So I'm going to stop that one. Then I have this server here. And you see this one says type HTTP localhost 8000/MCP. So that's the MCP endpoint that exposes everything. So I'm going to say restart. Okay, and it says discovered one tools. That's good. So that means that it is running. So now it is actually connecting to my server. And if I look back at my server logs, I can see that it got a request for listing tools. So you can see all these requests came in. So those requests came in from VS Code, which was like checking to see like, hey, is this server up? Is it alive? Can tell me what tools you have, right? So it asked for the tools and it asked for the prompts. So now we can go back over to our chat and check which servers we have enabled. So here I have, it's got everything checked. So I'm going to uncheck most of these and make sure that only checked this last one here, right? And it's important because all of these servers have very similar descriptions and tools, right? If I had all of them enabled, it would get confused and try to use the one that wasn't running. So I want to make sure that it's got the one selected that I wanted to use. All right. And then somebody mentioned avocado. So let's say, all right, I got an avocado sandwich for $30 in San Francisco on my Corp Amex yesterday, which is definitely something you would do in San Francisco. Once again, I know how to make my own avocado sandwiches at home, so I don't have to pay $30 in San Francisco, but you know. So here we go. So it ran on the server. Actually, it ran on the old one. How did it run on the old one? I don't even know how it managed to run on the old one. I'm going to double check and make sure. It auto started. Okay. Not cool. For some reason, it has decided to start all of mine, even though we have a setting that says don't auto start. So I'm gonna just stop them again, make sure we only have the one server running. Because once again, if there are multiple servers running that all look really similar, it's just going to pick the first one it randomly decides on. All right, I'm going to unselect, press OK, check again, make sure they are not secretly running, check my tools again. Okay, feeling good. And let's see, I got another, let's say avocado sushi for $20 on my Amex today. All right. So this time you can see it says expenses MCP HTTP. So that means it is using the HTTP version of the server, and we should see it get processed in our server logs here. So that looks good. I will allow. And you can see it says processing request of the call tool request and adding expense. So this is a log for our server. So we can see that it did go out to our server and that our server processed it. Okay, great. So now we have really similar code running over the server. Just the difference there was really just the last line. And then we had to, run that server explicitly ourselves to make sure that the server was up and receiving at that port. Now we're going to give you a few development tips for MCP servers. One is that there's this great tool called the MCP Inspector. This is a tool you can run with NPX. Now, it's easier to run it on your own machine. Unfortunately, there are some issues running it inside code spaces due to security and cross-origin issues. So we're going to recommend running this one on your actual machine. So let me actually run the command. I think I've got it here, NPX. Okay, so here I'm running the latest version of the inspector, and I'm going to press enter. And that's going to start up the inspector and open it up here. And so now this inspector is running, and I can say what sort of server I want to connect to. I'm going to connect to an HTTP server. And then for the URL, what I'm going to do is go to my code space, and let's see, I want to make the 8000 port. I want to expose the 8000 port. So let me see if it's going to offer to expose that. Okay, it's not showing up in my ports. Oh, let me try adding it, 8000. Okay. All right, so it's not letting me expose it. All right, for some reason it's not exposing the ports, so I won't be able to show you with the code spaces, but let me go ahead and run it locally as well. Okay, so I do have it running locally on 8000 MCP. Let me just make sure. Okay, so that looks good. So then I'm going to tell the inspector to connect locally. It is now connected. So this is connected to the server that's running here in my local VS Code. And once we have it open, we can now explore the server. So we've got resources, prompts, tools. We've got a bunch of other things we didn't even talk about. There's ping, sampling, elicitations, routes, and auth. So there's a lot of things you can test out here. Today, we're focusing on the first three, right? So we can say list resources, and we can see the get expenses data. We can call it and get back a response. We can list the prompts, see that prompt, and we can get back the prompt back here, right? And see what it will look like. And then tools, that's the one that people are using the most, right? We can list the tools and fill it out. 2025, 0801, amount $30, category. For this one, we have to put this in quotes because they're still working on their drop-down support for enums. So we'll just put it in quotes, sushi, dinner, payment method, oh, that should be MX. This should be food. Okay. And then I'm going to run the tool. Let's see. Oh yeah, MX. I changed it. It should be food. Didn't I change this to food? All right, let's see. There we go. I added the expense. Yeah. So you can, this is another way that you can test out your MCP servers and just be able to interact with it. It's just a tool for developers, right? But it can be really handy to use. All right, so that's one tool you could use. Another tool you could use is that you can actually do breakpoint debugging in VS Code of MCP servers. So that's really cool. I'm always excited when we can actually use breakpoint debugging, because when you do actually have errors in Python code, one approach is you put a bunch of print statements in your code, but that can be painful to do if the error is quite hairy and difficult. So what's really nice is if you can actually use a breakpoint debugger in order to step through the code, right? So how I'm going to do this is, let me close down the HTTP server, and then I'm going to add a breakpoint. So to add a breakpoint, I click right here in the stdio file. I click here to add a breakpoint. So you see the little red shows up. So that means when I am debugging this file, it will stop at that point and let me step through it, one by one. So we've got the breakpoint. Then what I'm going to do is go and stop that server. I'm going to start up the debug version of this server here. And so I have to give it a few additional arguments so that it's able to be debugged. So now that should be running. And then I'll go over to my debugger and run the debugger. So now you can see the debugger is up. You can see this like kind of step-by-step view here. And now I'll go over to my agent mode and make sure I've got the debug server enabled. And then say like, okay, $20 of pizza on my Amex today. All right. So let's see. It wants to add, and boom, it did it. I'm so excited when this works. So it has stopped at the breakpoint, and now we can see this really nice overlay. We can see exactly what is coming into our function, right? We can look at the Python types. We can watch variables, all the things you would expect from breakpoint debugging. And then you can step line by line through this code and see exactly what it is doing and how the variables are changing over time. And then, when you're happy, you can just play through to the end and see it go. So those are two big tools that you can use, would be the MCP inspector and breakpoint debugging. Now, get to the question a lot of people are asking about is, how can you point your agents at MCP servers, right? We had a talk yesterday about agents, and we showed how you could build agents using Agent Framework, using LangChain, using Pedantic AI. There's so many great agent frameworks out there. And you can, of course, point those agents at custom tools, but you could also point them at MCP servers that expose tools, and that can be a common way of connecting agents to MCP servers. So the first example we're going to look at is the Microsoft Agent Framework pointing at a hosted MCP server, like an external MCP server. So that example is here in the same code. So go to Agent Framework, MCP Learn. And, so here we have to configure our model to point at wherever our model is hosted. So by default, that's GitHub Models, which is free inside GitHub Codespaces. So you should be able to run it. And then we have the actual code. So what we do is we say, all right, we are connecting to this MCP server. We pass in, a name, a URL, headers. Actually, we don't need the headers for this one. That's why it says barrier token. Let's remove the headers there. We don't need the headers because this is a public MCP server that doesn't require authorization. And then we have our agent, and the agent is, you have two different ways. You can actually pass the MCP server directly into the agent, or you can pass the MCP server to an individual query. So in this case, we're actually passing the MCP server into just this particular query. So you can do it either way. It depends if you want the agent to always have access to that server, right? In that case, you could be like this. tools equals MCP server, or you pass it specifically into the query. So let's run this here. And it is running here, and it's going out, and it is, using that MCP server to get information and then responding. So we can see that it comes back with an answer, and it says, for more information, check the official docs. So this is really nice because now we're able to get answers to questions that have citations, right? And that's particularly useful for documentation, because a lot of times if you're just going to use it as an LLM about some documentation question, it'll just go on its outdated knowledge. And, things move so quickly these days. Like, we really want to get the most updated knowledge. So giving it a documentation server where it can actually go out and get that information and then cite where it got that information from is really, really helpful. So there we go. So that was running against a hosted server. Now, how would we run it against our own local server, right? So with LangChain, here I've got a LangChain example, and this LangChain example is running against this localhost 8000. So that means I need to run that server again. So let's go ahead and run that server again. Make sure it's exposed on our 8000 URL. Okay, so now it's running. So we're going to connect to that server down here. So we say we're making an MCP client that can connect to this server over HTTP. And then we pass the tools into our agent here. And it says, yesterday I bought a laptop for $1,200 using my Visa. And then we send that message to the agent. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this code. And we should see, so we can see stuff happening in our server, right? So we can see that it is trying to work with our server, and we do see that the request went through. It added that expense to the expenses, right? And then we also see the response here. So that's how you could point an agent at your own server. Right. And you can specify authorization. So if your server was protected with a key or with some sort of token, you could pass that in as additional headers to that MCP. So you can do these things with any of the agent frameworks, right? I've done this with Agent Framework, with LangChain, with Pedantic AI. So whatever framework you're using, you should be able to connect with either a hosted server or a local server, and you should be able to pass in headers in order to control the authorization. Now, one tip that I want to give is to consider filtering the tools from MCP servers, right? I showed earlier how we could do that in Copilot, is to, make sure that we're only giving it access to the tools that it needs, the read-only tools that are going to be useful for something. So we could do the same thing when we're pointing agents at servers. So the example I have is using LangChain. So this is here we've got some LangChain code, and this one is connecting to the GitHub server. And so you remember that one does take in a token. So here it's grabbing the GitHub token that's inside our GitHub code spaces. And then it's getting all the tools from the server and filtering down the tools to only 3 of the tools. So I'm only giving it access to 3 of the tools. And then I'm, sending off my request, right? So I said, find popular Python MCP server repositories. Okay. So let's try this out and see what it decides to do. So what we can see is that it says, these are the filtered tools. It has a bunch of block tools. And now it's going to actually run the query with just those filtered tools, right? So we got a bunch of results here, including the one that we're using today. And some other popular MCP servers, right? So really want to encourage you to consider filtering tools from the servers. That way you're going to reduce the amount of tools that you send, that you throw the LLM. Because if you show the LLM you've got 97 tools, it now has to decide between 97 tools. And that's a big decision, right? So you're going to help it make decisions better if you know ahead of time you only need some of those tools. You're going to reduce your context window, the amount of tokens you're using, and you're going to speed up your request by a huge amount because you're not going to be sending it as much information, right? So if you know ahead of time that you only need a subset of the tools, filter down those tools to only what's needed. All right. So now we've seen how to build our own servers, how to use other people's servers, and how to point agents at MCP servers. So now what I want to talk about is that some people are like starting to use MCP as like a way of organizing the architecture of like your internal servers within an organization, right? So if you're at a company and within your company, you're seeing like lots of people that are starting to build agents and build common tools that are shared across the agents, then your company might consider like actually using MCP as the internal mechanism where, multiple agents from different teams could actually be using each other's functionality, right? So it's basically like microservices, but for your AI agents, right? And I know that like I went to a great talk from Uber, and Uber has a whole team that is in charge of their MCP, like internal MCP server, MCP registry, like helping people across Uber build agents on top of shared common MCP servers within Uber, right? So this is a pattern that's starting to emerge at organizations, is like you're building internal AI agents, you're building internal functionality for those agents, might as well expose those over MCP, have internal MCP registries in order to find that out. So what would that look like? If you were gonna, do this on Azure, you could actually like be deploying these MCP servers to things like Azure Functions. Your host might be Azure Container Apps. You could put them all within the same virtual network, and so they would all, be communicating safely within a virtual network. You could also, of course, put them behind authorization as another layer of security, right? So that's what this sort of architecture could look like. We do have an example template, which is our Azure AI Travel Agents template, which uses this sort of architecture. And so it actually runs MCP servers in multiple languages. So in TypeScript, .NET, Java, Python, and Go, I think. Yeah, those are all the languages we have. And that's an interesting thing too, is that when you're using MCP, you could have different servers written in different languages, because that happens at companies, definitely, right? You use the best language for the job or the one the team knows. And you could have agents built in different languages too. And then they can all communicate over MCP. So that is something to consider in terms of how you start to adopt MCP within, larger organizations and companies. Now, just want to talk briefly about what you want to consider if you are putting MCP into production, right? If you're exposing an MCP server to the world, or even internally within an organization. So the first thing you definitely want to consider is private networking, right? If you are deploying to Azure, we have a lot of private networking options, right? So you could put everything within a virtual network, and that makes sure that the communication can only happen within that network. You can set up networking rules to say what ports and endpoints are allowed, right? So that would be, a really good approach if your MCP architecture is all internal and you don't need to expose it out to the world, right? If you are going to be making a public facing server, then many of you are probably going to be thinking about authorization. And this is where you need to be really, really careful. I did say that so of course you could do API keys. API keys could be fine depending, if that works for the kind of API you're exposing. But many people are using MCP servers to expose user specific functionality. And that means you need user auth, right? You need OAuth in order to identify the user and then do things on behalf of that user. So if you check the MCP specification, you'll see that it builds on top of OAuth, but it requires additional functionality from OAuth that is not available in all OAuth servers. So for a very specific example, Microsoft Entra does not actually support everything necessary for MCP auth, which is really sad for those of us who work at Microsoft. And, hopefully they will come to support it in the future. But it's just some additional OAuth extensions that Entra has not implemented. So if you needed to, put a MCP server using Microsoft Entra, you would have to use what's called an OAuth proxy in order to do that safely, right? If you're not using Entra, then you just want to make sure that whatever identity server that you're using, that it fully supports everything in the MCP auth spec. And not just plain OAuth. A great example of this is the open source server called Keycloak. and that does support everything necessary. So I know some people that are using Keycloak, but there's also some other identity providers that do support what's needed for the full MCP auth spec. Yeah, we're just gonna sit here and beg Entra. Come on, Entra, come on. Maybe if I publicly shame in the video, could it work? But you can. There is an OAuth proxy being set up for Entra in the FastMCP package, so you can stay tuned for that. It is a viable approach. So we'll keep you updated about what is the right approach to use if you are using Entra. Because we know lots of people do want to use Entra for servers. So we're gonna keep up to date on what approach is viable there. Generally at Microsoft, we are really full in on MCP. I know I just said we're a little behind on the Entra front, but we have so many teams working on MCP and adding support for MCP to the product. So if you look all across Microsoft, you will see support for it in many of the products. And I think you'll find this at lots of companies that everybody's going all in at MCP and figuring out how to add it, because once you add MCP support to a product, then you multiply the power of that product, because now anyone can take any MCP server and plug it in, and then boom, now you've got something that's much more capable. Once again, you do want to be careful about what MCP servers you're using and what tools you're giving access to, and keeping in mind security risks that you could be subjecting yourself to. If you do want to learn more about MCP, we have an MCP for Beginners curriculum at this GitHub URL that goes through everything and has lots of articles. We've got more templates that show you how to deploy MCP servers to Azure. This is one that I've deployed before, which shows how to deploy an MCP server to Azure. It actually does add some authentication on top with Entra, and which does actually work, but it only works with VS Code. It doesn't work with other clients. So it shows you at least how you would do Entra auth in VS Code. And then we've got tons of MCP servers at Microsoft. So we have the Microsoft Learn MCP, which we saw. We have GitHub MCP. We also saw that one. There's also the Azure MCP server if you're using Azure resources and want to ask questions about them or act on them. And then the Playwright MCP server is super useful for doing any sort of browser manipulation. So we now have 3 minutes left, and that is what I wanted to share about MCP. I am going to check the chat now and see what questions we have. Any plans for an MCP UI framework? All right, let's talk about MCP UI. That's pretty cool. The idea about MCP UI is to standardize UI on top of MCP. And this is like, imagine a world where instead of having websites, we doing everything in chat clients like ChatGPT and Copilot and stuff like that. And in that case, like, you really want a really rich UI so that you're not just using text, like you've got like buttons and drop downs and stuff like that, right? So if that world comes to fruition, which it could, right? Like maybe websites aren't even a thing anymore, right? Like maybe 2 years from now, we're not dealing with websites and we're just using these chat interfaces for everything. And you could argue that would be like a better world, right? Because right now with websites, whenever you go to a website, you have to like figure out how to navigate it. If everything's exposed to MCP servers, well, you just type in some text and then, the server can help you out. So there's some that argue that that might actually be a more consistent user experience for people. So the idea with MCP UI would be to make these UI components. Let me see. I have never actually tried this live demo. An error occurred. Okay. But you definitely check out MCP UI. I don't know particularly any like plans for Microsoft here. We might have plans. If we do, I don't know about them. But it's a very exciting thing to think about with MCP UI. I do really recommend the Kent Dodds talk. There we go. Kent Dodds, Future of User Interaction. I really like this talk. He laid out that whole vision. Sorry, that was a poor link. Maybe Anna can clean up that link for me. But he like really lays out the vision and includes some demos of MCP UI. Okay, so I also have a question. Any certification we can go to after these series? What do we recommend? Well, so it's not a certification, but I do recommend the MCP for Beginners repo here. Let me check to see if we do have any certifications around MCP. So let's see, Microsoft Learn certifications. And if anybody else knows, do mention in the chat. I don't remember us having one for MCP. No. I think the one that lots of people recommend, I feel like it's called like AI. Oh, maybe this one, Azure AI Engineer Associate. So I think this would generally be a good one to get after going through this series. That is the Azure AI Engineer. So check that. Let me post it here. And if anybody has their own recommendations for other credentials, Gwen mentions AI 102. AI 102. Let's see what that one is. Oh, let me just search for it. Microsoft AI 102. 102. That one also looks. Oh, I feel like that's the one I just linked to. All right. Yeah. So good. That's the same. So check that one out. That one could be helpful. Oh, let's see. Let's check out. Oh yeah, we've got a bunch of resources just generally for Python and AI. So Anna's gonna add that link to the chat. Oh, we've had a recommendation for AI 900, Microsoft. Okay, so doing Azure AI fundamentals. All right, so definitely this one first. All right, we're gonna do all the link drops right now. All the link drops. And we are streaming to multiple channels. So that's why you'll see like sometimes I'll enter something in like the YouTube chat and then we'll post it out to all the channels, right? Because we stream these series to YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, TikTok, like all the places. So we've got questions from all over. Let's see. I see there's a question. How is agent to agent different from MCP? It's a great question. I actually have not played much with agent to agent. So maybe someone else who has more experience can comment on it. This was a protocol that came from Google and is now part of the Linux Foundation. And it's about agent interoperability. So I believe that it just exposes things at like maybe a higher level. I have seen like agent to agent examples. I was poking around at that in the agent framework because the Microsoft Agent Framework does have support for agent to agent. So if we look at the example, like sometimes for me, the best way I understand something is by looking at an example of it, right? So let's see, agents, A to A. Okay, so A to A, agent with A to A. So here we can see that it's like connecting to a host. And it looks like the agent has to define this like well-known agent.json, and then that would like describe the agent. And then you can create an agent based off of what you get back from that information. And then that presumably that agent exposes tools. So that's as much as I know about agent to agent. So I know we have support for an agent framework, and it looks like it means that when you like make your, agent, it needs to expose information about itself. But I don't really know how to compare it to MCP in terms of what functionality those agents expose. Let's see if we have any. Okay, this is a good question from Pablo. Are there protections available for AI agents that use MCP servers to avoid agents performing unwanted or dangerous actions with MCP servers? That's a great question. So the thing is, in the if we look at like MCP itself, and when we're defining our tools, I want to show the tools. Core components, tools. Okay, tools. And then we have decorator arguments. Okay. I'm looking for this one. Okay. So you can, in the tools, you can actually give a hint as to whether the tool is read-only, destructive, idempotent, and open world. So the idea of these is that tools could document their level of their ability to wreak havoc, right? Now, I would say I wouldn't trust these tools unless they were like internal and they'd been like there was like a good vetting system for them. But I did want to point out that, there has been some thought like, oh, maybe, this is something we could actually like specify, like, hey, these are all the read-only tools. These are, because certainly if a tool does say it's destructive in open world, you do want to be very careful, right? However, I'm a little concerned that if a tool doesn't say that, you shouldn't assume that it's not, right? Like any tool, even if it claims to be read-only, you don't actually know if it's read-only unless you have inspected that code like incredibly carefully, right? Because you can even like do a fetch to a server and pass information to that server, and then boom, like you've conveyed information to the world, right? So you can assume that if something says they're destructive, you should probably trust them on that point. But even if they say they're read only, I'd be careful about that. But maybe this is something you could use internally, right? So that's just something I wanted to point out, that is something you can decorate a tool with and actually declare that. Now, when you're using it from frameworks, then once again, I would recommend the filtering. So with the agent framework in particular, what you can see is that they have a few different interesting options here. So there's allowed tools. So I could pass in and say, these are the only allowed tools. So that's basically how we do tool filtering in agent framework. And then there's also an approval mode, right? And that's something you want to think about anytime you're building an agent is, do I always do I always want to allow that agent to take any action, or are there particular tools that I want to mark as requiring approval? So we see that here. We also see that in LangChain. If we go over to the LangChain docs, to the new docs, and look at the middleware, the human in the loop middleware, here you specify and say, okay, for this tool, I'm going to, allow these things. I'm going to have auto approve for this, right? So both of these frameworks have this notion that it should be easy to specify which tools require approval and to bring a human into the loop if something does require approval, right? So definitely look into that, and just think really carefully about what you're going to do, right? Like when I made my agent for triaging issues, I only gave the original agent, access to read-only tools, and then and then I it said like, okay, now it's time to bring a human in the loop, and the human would have to click the button before it had any access to update issues at all, right? And that's the way I like to do it. All right, so I think we've answered a good number of questions here. Now I see some more questions coming in, but we should wrap up for today. I do have to head over to San Francisco again for the second day of PyTorch and help answer questions from all the folks there. If you do have any additional questions, you can post it either in the discussion thread here, which the one that has all the resources. And I know people posted questions yesterday and I haven't had a chance to reply yet. I will get to them after the conference. So you can keep asking questions here, and I will answer these questions. So you can post questions there. You can also come to office hours. So we will keep having office hours on Tuesdays in Discord. So come to next Tuesday's office hours and bring lots of questions there. We very often end up talking about MCP and office hours. Like sometimes we're like, oh, maybe we should have like an MCP only office hours, but it's a very hot topic right now, right? So you can definitely bring any MCP questions there. We can also like explore new things like A2A, and you can bring all your questions there. So that is the end of our series, at least for our English series. If you want a little bit more action, we will have the Spanish version of MCP coming up this afternoon with Gwen. And so that would be like our final video in the series. It's been really great. I love all the questions, all the comments, all the great vibes in the chat and the office hours and the discussions. So I hope you all enjoyed it. If you do have ideas for more series that we should do, more topics, post those ideas here in the comments, post them in the thread, in the Discord, just find a way to let us know so that it can go into our planning. I think it's super fun to put on these series. It's a great way for me to learn these things as well, and to really dig into it and help share all this knowledge. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great day. Bye.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.